Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. How you doing? My name is Caleb. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to fail at bug bounty hunting. So who am I? So I'm Caleb Kinney. I'm a full-time security engineer conducting application penetration tests, and I moonlight as a part-time bug bounty hunter. Um, so with that, I'm more or less having some imposter syndrome that is sharing this virtual stage with giants of the bug bounty community, especially going after Jason's great talk. So I'm a husband and actually soon to be father, runner. I love some rye whiskey, and I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, as you're going to find out. My Twitter handle is a fire. My platform username is Caleb, and you can find some of my scripts on GitHub at Caleb Kinney and at or1=1. You can also find my blog at bountyhuntersguild.com. So this talk is going to focus on some of my lessons learned as I continue to fail as a part-time bug hunter. And like all good stories, we will have a setting, conflict, and resolution wrapped up with some practical tips and resources. So the first DEF CON I attended was DEF CON 22, and I really made the mistake of not socializing as I rushed to see as many talks as I could. The next year, I was better prepared of what DEF CON had to offer and resolved to spend more time in the community. So I ended up at the Bug Crowd Suite at their party, where I found out that gin and chocolate covered insects are in fact an awesome combo. And what separated that bug ground party from other parties was the conversations with hackers who were really passionate about bug hunting. Intrigued, I found myself attending How to Shot Web by Bug Crowd's Jason Haddix, which included some great takeaways from my professional application penetration testing career, and actually changed my application testing methodology. And that talk actually continues to be a fantastic resource. And as you guys heard, he didn't disappoint in the version 2. So I left DEF CON thinking that bug hunting seemed really cool. So it was essentially a license to hunt for vulnerabilities on a real production targets with monetary and gamification incentives. It was like being an InfoSec Boba Fett. Probably looked just as cool as that guy. So when I returned from DEF CON, and I shortly created an account on the platform. However, it wasn't until several months later that I actually got around to submitting my first bug. And I submitted my bug, and I patiently waited in suspense. The response was the dreaded duplicate, but nonetheless, I found myself hooked and continued to submit vulnerabilities. And along the way, I failed a lot. And I learned from those fails to become a better hunter. Hackers are always easy to show you when they succeed, with write-ups and tweets about upcoming payouts. But it's rare to see the failures. And I think sometimes they're just as important as the wins. And I wish somebody had showed me some of their failures that I could learn from. I'm just going to warn you before I get into the next section that you're about to see some really bad and terrible bugs, embarrassing bugs that I personally submitted. So the worst fail of them all was I failed to read the bounty brief. And this will forever be a black eye on the accuracy section of my profile that will never return to 100%, no matter how hard I try. I'm trying to make it as close to that as I can. So the program had a wide scope. However, there were several subdomains that were listed out of scope for the program. And I found a valid vulnerability, but unfortunately, I failed to realize that one particular subdomain was called out in the bounty brief as being out of scope. And that's where I'd found the vulnerability. So the fix is easy. So to read and understand the bug bounty program brief. The program brief is your rules of engagement and contains the program's scope, which are the targets you're allowed to test, the focus areas, which are things that are most important to the program, out of scope, targets that you're not allowed to test against, exclusions, so any excluded vulnerabilities that the program does not want reported, and the rewards. What are the incentives for submitting a vulnerability? Is it swag, Hall of Fame, or cash rewards? And disclosure rules, so the program's vulnerability disclosure policy. And one tip is to ask questions where the bounty brief does not appear clear or is vague. The next two bugs are very similar, and this one's very embarrassing. So first, I'd failed to show impact, if significant impact even existed in the first place. And on this example, I don't think it did, but if it did, I'd submitted a low impact, terrible bug without valid argument to increase the priority level. For when I first started bug hunting, I submitted every bug that I found, and vulnerability priority was not in my thought process, although I wish it was. So the fix for this one is to understand vulnerability prioritization and explain impact to the program owners. So P1 is a critical vulnerability, usually privilege escalation, remote code execution, sensitive data exfiltration. A P2 is severe and affects the security of the platform. P3 is moderate, so it affects multiple users and requires little or no user interaction. P4s are lows, which affect single users and require user interaction. P5s are informational or won't fix and include non-exploitable vulnerabilities and usually will not be fixed by the program. All of these correspond to platforms points and program rewards. It's also important to explain the impact to system owners. This might mean going above the simple proof of concept and clearly explain what attacker could do to exploit the issue. But I caution you, you need to be careful and make sure that you adhere to the bug bounty program's stance on pivoting and escalation. Try to explain why the exploit is important for the bug bounty program to take action and remediate. Explain if the bug requires victim interaction. And if it does, are you able to bypass any security controls? Explain if the bug affects single or multiple users. And I know in my experience, maybe that P5 self-test success can be combined with a CSRF to become a P2 or P3 vulnerability. So the next fail is fail to understand criticality. And it really goes hand in hand with the last one. So I submitted a bug that was valid and reproducible, but did not have any security impact. And didn't require a fix from the program. With that, I sacrificed my average technical severity score by submitting a won't fix vulnerability. This really depends on your goal of bug bounty hunting. But after learning from my mistakes, I will typically not submit bugs that are lower than a P3 priority to increase my chance of being selected for private programs. This is also a pretty easy fix, and to utilize the BugCrowd vulnerability rating taxonomy. So the VRT is a baseline priority rating for common vulnerabilities. It helps research identify bugs and assists in providing exploitation information that may impact a report's priority. It follows the same priority level, P1 through P5, has a broad category, which is the OWASP top 10, plus a few extras included by BugCrowd, a specific vulnerability name, and the variant or affected function. So for example, you have a cross-site scripting vulnerability that is stored and it affects non-admin to anyone. Researchers can easily assess in most situations what a bug would be rewarded and what should be focused on during testing. And if I had properly used the VRT, I would have probably focused on higher priority vulnerabilities, understanding what specific vulnerabilities are worth in the bug bounty realm. This has also been a great resource to me in other security research, not including bug bounties, but having this taxonomy as a resource. The next fail is a pretty tricky one, and it's a little bit in context, but I didn't do the due diligence to research a vulnerability reported as it related to the application. So in this particular example, I had excitedly thought that I had found a mobile API indirect object reference that exposed sensitive information. Unfortunately, on the web application, this information was publicly and readily available. Although it originally appeared to be a vulnerability, it was in fact a feature of the application. There's not a really great fix for this, but I do have some tips. So research the application and ask questions. Cross-reference functions on mobile and web platforms. And I think the most important is to take a moment prior to submitting the vulnerabilities to ensure nothing was overlooked, that false positives don't exist, and there weren't other mistakes. And also, I've had great success to reaching out to platform support to answer any thought out questions or clarifications on application functions. The next fail was to fail for Fail to plan for private programs. The very first private program invites that I received had specific times that a program would begin. And I made the noob mistake of ignoring the start time and instead participated when it was most convenient for me. Sometimes this meant days or weeks after the program officially began. And as a result, I received many duplicate submissions for valid vulnerabilities that had already been submitted by bug crowd researchers. Fix is obviously an easy one. Schedule time to work on the program as soon as it's published. In bug bounty hunting, it is the first to find that are rewarded. So make your best effort to hunt on a target as soon as it is made available, and you will benefit from fewer duplicate submissions. The next fail is to fail to plan for blacklisting. So last Black Friday, my wife tried to access several retail shops and found out we were blocked from a good number of them. My public IP address assigned by my internet service provider had been put on an IP blacklist. This affected my public IP on sites that I was actively testing, as well as tons of unrelated sites utilizing the threat protection service. And unfortunately, I had no easy solution to obtain a new public IP address. So as you can imagine, I was in some hot water. So the fix is to have a public IP address pool. And there's different ways to do this, but what I recommend is to segregate your public IP from bug bounty hunting activities, or have the ability to obtain a new public IP address. It is relatively hard to convince your internet service provider to issue a new public IP address. Sometimes explaining to your ISP that you were hacking websites, albeit legally, doesn't help your case. Although, I found out through experience that a new router MAC address will force some ISPs to issue a new public IP address. Or you can plan to use an alternative IP address, such as a VPN or a proxy. I think the hardest lesson I had to learn, coming from application pen testing, was that bug bounties were not penetration tests. The vulnerabilities that programs were interested in differed, the rules change, and the methodology is not the same. For example, P5s may be reported on a penetration test where best practices should be enforced, but may be unwanted by bug bounty program owners. Pivoting or using certain automated tools may be prohibited on a bug bounty program. And the first to find rewarding changes how you approach an application and report on those vulnerabilities. There will be wins, especially if you're diligent and learn from your failures. Perhaps patiently you've been waiting for that place in the Hall of Fame leaderboard or a coveted private bug bounty program invite. And there will still be fails, hopefully just less of them. So these are a few of my tips for part-time hunters to help you on your journey. So wide scopes allow for more surface area and for more hidden gems to be found. It's a bonus if acquisitions or mergers are in scope. Assume automated scanning. Assume that a company or other researchers found the low-hanging fruit that an automated scanner will discover. And as a part-time hunter, sometimes the automation can hurt or delay findings that have been around faster, could have been found faster without having to analyze vast amounts of data. And recon. As a part-time hunter, time is a luxury. Save time by starting with effective target reconnaissance. And think outside the box for new, emergent, and complicated threat vectors. A good example would be using recently discovered vulnerabilities, as was the case with the image tragic exploit, or utilizing blind XSS vectors with a service like XSS Hunter. Like most of you, Burp Suite is my favorite tool of choice. So utilize your favorite Burp Suite extensions. There's an ever-growing number of them available. A few of mine are reflected parameters, which identifies request parameters reflected in the response. This can help detect cross-site scripting, open redirect, LFI, RFI, and other vulnerabilities. BurbKit, which incorporates WebKit used by Safari and other browsers to better render the responses in Burp. And it also includes JavaScript detection. And CO2, which is a suite of modules. However, my favorite is SQL Mapper to quickly create SQL commands from requests. And payload lists, including polygon payloads, consisting vectors that are fire in multiple contexts. These will allow you to quickly identify potential vulnerabilities with a handful of payloads. And the bug bounty community is my biggest asset. Most of the hunters are willing to selflessly share knowledge and help out their fellow hacker. So make sure you're plugged into the community in some aspect. So bug bounty makes me a better researcher, even outside of the bug bounty space. It truly helps me understand what's important to system owners and the ever-changing industry. I am more attuned to emergent security trends by being more involved in the AppSec community. I challenge myself for more technical exploits to combat duplicate submissions. I'm less dependent on automation, focusing more on manual penetration methods. The first defined model incentivizes me to find bugs faster and evolve my methodology. And I write better reports by reporting vulnerabilities to a variety of system owners. And I gain the experience in a vast amount of application infrastructures, platforms, and frameworks. And I'm more involved in the researcher community that has forged friendships, support groups, and an outlet to give back. So I think what's most important is having some mobile recon, or having the ability to do some mobile recon. So I currently use an iPhone with Blink Shell. Blink Shell is an SSH and Mosh client for iOS, and it doesn't require a jailbreak. Mosh is similar to SSH as a remote terminal application, but it supports roaming and intermittent connectivity, which is perfect for mobile users. So I set up a port forwarding with dynamic DNS on a Raspberry Pi that was running DiaPi as my jump box, which allows me to pivot to any machine on my internal network. This enables me to run recon and other tasks when I'm out of the house or otherwise away from the keyboard. I also wrote a recon script to help automate some of the subdomain recon and bug bounty targets for wide scopes. So I wrote a simple Python wrapper around 3 subdomain tools. So first is Sublister by Ahmed Abu Allah, Domain by Jason Haddix, which utilized the Recon NG framework, NocPy by Gianni Amato. And these are all combined to create a unique subdomain list. And it passes that list to Eyewitness by Chris Trunzer, which will compile the report with categorized screenshots, server response headers, and signature-based default credential checking. I wrote it to be a one-stop shop for wide-scoped recon and added some easy functions such as simple proxy and VPN detection. My goal is to continue to evolve and expand the recon capabilities of the script. And I've already started working on the next iteration to evolve into a Flask app to run recon and review reports as a web application. If you're interested, I posted to the bottom of this, to the GitHub at the bottom of the slide. Lastly, I leave you with a collection of my favorite bug bounty resources, which corresponds to a lot of things Jason talked about. So the Web Application Hacker's Handbook. So the industry standard full-sized in-depth resource and methodology for web application pen testing, which is co-written by the co-creator of Burp Suite. 2 books by my fellow bug bounty hackers, Web Hacking 101 by P. Worski, which analyzes real-life bug bounty submissions, and Breaking into Information Security by Andy Gill, aka Zephyrfish, which is a guide for beginning penetration testers and bug bounty hunters. Payload lists, which are perfect for importing into Dirtbuster, Burp Intruder, or your tool of choice. Published bounty reports, great for learning new attack vectors and how to present findings in bug bounty reports. Various communities, Bug Bounty Forum and Bug Bounty World, both which I'm honored to be a part of, and I continue to learn so much from their members. And lastly, if you're not ready for bug hunting and want some guided practice in AppSec, test applications such as OWASP, Broken Web Application Project, is a combination of several vulnerable web applications in one handy virtual machine, and is a great training resource. In conclusion, everybody will have their own path and failures, and that is okay. Just remember to learn from those failures and become better hunters.